exciting.
Hi, y'all.
Sorry we're late.
Yes, we're technical difficulties.
Yeah.
But I think the drought is over here, and we always look forward to summer in New England because, you know, the rain is warmer. And tonight we're going to continue our 20th anniversary with a home on the range trip to Elko, Nevada, where there is no rain, to answer a burning question: can a middle-aged pet mortician from the Midwest realize his lifelong dream of going west to the open range and the National Cowboy Gathering? And can he find his true love, the cowgirl Ginger? Katie Sparks' book, Four Dead Horses, is laugh out loud funny, darkly sardonic, overflowing with heart, an exquisitely crafted romp through one man's life in the upper Midwest and the dreams of versifying cowboys that carry him through. KT will be in conversation tonight with local writer and fellow festival planner, Stephanie Greene. So while we are home on the range dreaming of horses and cowboy poets, I'm enjoying a little glass of free-range red. What is everyone else drinking?
Bubble water to keep my head on my shoulders correctly.
And I have a fabulous non-alcoholic Beck's beer, which is like the most pathetic cowboy drink ever. But
it's very pathetic.
Right?
Right. Okay, good.
Do we have a drink survey?
Let's see. Turmeric chai tea, not yet spiked.
Ah, there we go.
There we are.
Nice.
Well, I guess mine's I don't know if you can even say, I guess mine's okay, cool.
Gin and tonic. Whiskey. I kept thinking I needed to get some Sierra Nevada ale, but I've never drank it before, and I just wasn't sure about it. So, and at the end of the day, it just poured down rain all day, and I didn't want to get out. So, anyway.
Yeah. Not even a Coors, right? Oh, golly. Oh.
So KT Sparks is a writer and a farmer whose work has appeared in the Kenyon Review, Pank, and elsewhere. KT received an AB in politics, economics, rhetoric, and law from the University of Chicago, an MA in politics, philosophy, and economics from Oxford University, Brasenose College, and an MFA in creative writing from Queen's University in Charlotte. An educational grounding that matches her lifelong interest in everything and mastery of nothing. She spent 25 years in Washington, D.C., most of it in the U.S. Senate, as a policy analyst and a speechwriter, and she continues to be involved in progressive politics, most recently with President Biden's campaign. She lives in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia with her husband, dog, a fluctuating population of barn cats, and absolutely no horses, dead or alive. Four Dead Horses is her first novel. Stephanie Greene's short fiction has been published in Nostoc Magazine, Green Mountain Review, Sky Island Journal, The New Guard, and Flash Fiction Magazine. Her work has been long-listed for the Lascaux Prize for short fiction, nominated for inclusion in the Best of the Net anthology, and for a Pushcart Prize. And contributed to Vermont Public Radio for 9 years, she is revising her second novel, her first being safely locked in a drawer. She lives on the family farm with her husband, writer and artist Marshall Brooks. So if you have any questions for the authors, enter them into the Q&A window on your screen. You can also upvote questions that are already asked to get them moved to the top. So without further ado, Stephanie,
welcome. Thank you.
You want to take it away?
Sure. Thank you so much, Sandy. Lovely introductions, and welcome, KT. We're so thrilled to have you here. I love your book, and I would love to hear you read the first paragraph.
Weirdness, I just lost my speakers.
You lost your.
No, they're back. They're back.
Oh,
Thank
yay!
you.
Okay.
Signed into my AirPods that are put carefully away. It's like the computer gods are against us today. So I'm sorry, Stephanie, I missed what you just said since it was talking into my AirPod case.
No. I was singing your praises, and I'd love to hear you read the first couple of paragraphs from this wonderful, funny, heartwarming book.
Absolutely. I'll just start right ahead. Martin Oliphant had always hated horses, their staggering stupidity, their unexplained, unexpected, and ever explosive snorting, the way they twitched distinct patches of their skin to dislodge flies, the way they shied madly at the most innocuous occurrences, a golf umbrella at 50 feet, a leaf falling from, of all places, a tree, a bale of hay stacked exactly where it was supposed to be stacked and had been stacked for the last month. Martin Oliphant hated horses, but he didn't, it must be said, wish horses dead. It must be said because horses died around him, died or almost died, at Martin's hand or almost at Martin's hand. And it was horses, dead ones mostly, that blazed the trail to his life-forging passion. Horses brought Martin to cowboy poetry, and horses, live ones mostly, were cowboy poetry's central theme.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Now, this begs the question, do you actually like horses?
It's funny. I really like horses. I like horses, and I love Western riding, and I am a lot like Martin in this, in sort of in the matter of horses, where I see myself as a fantastic Western, like a real cowgirl, and but I actually have neither the talent nor the I mean, I don't practice. I ride once a year, and have for most of my life, and on a 1 week a year dude ranch vacation. But I'm not particularly good at it. But I see myself as this fantastic rider, and I even to the point where I took lessons out here, and I live in hunt country, which is not a place where there's much Western riding, but I managed to find this barrel racing stables out here, and I took lessons, and I went with like the little kids. There's actually a scene in the book that is reminiscent of where Martin goes to a horseback riding lesson with a bunch of little girls, where that was me. I go with a bunch of little girls. They're all better than I am. I'm terrible. And to the point where this woman who teaches the riding here, who has made her name for being able to teach anyone to ride, had sort of gracefully exited me from my lessons the day I almost killed one of her best horses by like having it charge out of the arena with me still on it. It almost decapitated me too, which probably would have been bad for business. But because I literally couldn't, she pretended that she was like changing, she was going to move her business, which she didn't, so that I wouldn't call up and ask for any more lessons. So,
oh no! Oh no!
I would love to be a good writer, but I am not a good writer.
But yeah, I always thought that the pommel was a really wonderful invention, to just hold on to. So from this horse, the horses, or the vehicle as it were, for Martin, in his discovery of cowboy poetry, tell us about your discovery of cowboy poetry.
The actually tremendously embarrassing thing is that I actually thought I invented cowboy poetry. Now, cowboy poetry, what it actually is, it's this sort of incredibly rich performative folk art that started among the cowboys on the post-Civil War cattle drives, the Chisholm Trail, and all those times where the cowboys would be out, and they would do what they could to entertain themselves in the evenings, and recite poetry was one of those things, and these were educated people. It was very sort of Homeric, they would cite these long poems, and some of them were songs, but that was less common. It was actually more common for them to be reciting poems, and this sort of continued. It was And they also wrote some of them. Some of them were a lot of them were written by the guys out there. They would do that when they're on the trail. That's why they're very rhythmic. They're very formal. A lot of them. They're rhyming. They're in meter. And it continued. It continued even after the drives, and it was very popular in sort of Western papers. Would print a lot of cowboy poetry, and then sort of died out with the Hollywood Cowboys, but it never really died out in the Western ranching communities. And in 1985, some sort of ethnographers who working with Smithsonian and with the National Endowment for the Arts pulled together some cowboys they'd sort of known who were ranching families who had been writing this poetry sort of for themselves and friends for really for years, and brought them together to in the first National Cowboy Poetry Gathering to do this recitation. And it's become the gathering itself, which is in Elko, Nevada every year, and there's a version of it in this book, has become like a real sort of big, like one of the greatest, I think, living folk arts out there. And so cowboy poetry is really, it's about writing the poetry. It's about reading the old poetry. It's mostly about recitation. And the whole performance and the sort of being able to stand up and recite the poems and sort of in the ways they did around campfires. So anyway, that's a long story. This has all existed for years and years and years. There's the Western, it's very popular in Western communities. Meanwhile, me, I'm writing a story. I was writing a short story, which was the first version of when Martin Oliphant, my main character, appeared. And in it, there's his character is visiting a dude ranch, and he is being made fun of by the dude ranch's cowboy poet, which is something I thought it was funny. I made it up, like that they would hire somebody to be a poet and they call him a cowboy poet. And so I'm thinking, this is hilarious, cowboy poetry. And somebody was in a critique group was reading the story, and they said, there's cowboy poetry is like a real thing. And I'm like, no. And so I started looking into it. And I'm like, wow, there's a huge, long 150-year tradition, and I thought I made it up. But once I started looking into it, I was just fascinated with it, and then thought about, look, what if a Midwestern guy with no sort of Western roots at all falls in love with this, with this folk art, and he has nothing in common with the cowboy poets, because cowboy poets, one of the sort of main tenets of cowboy poetry is that the poets are all working ranchers, or they work on ranches, they work with horses. A lot of them are rodeo riders, but that's part of it. It's a big part of it. It's a celebration of ranching and Western culture, and it's also by people who are in it. And so it is not the right thing for a Midwestern pet mortician to be in love with and want and make as his great goal. It's like me, making as my great goal to be a, I don't know, female bull rider. It's like just not probably going to happen. But
well, we actually KT has supplied us with a clip of a gentleman named Shad Peel,
right,
reciting a poem, and I think we can share screens and do it.
He's one of the modern cowboy poets. I mostly cite in my book classic cowboy poetry, but Shad is a modern cowboy poet, and he let me use this poem that I'm going to show you as his as the epigraph to the book. And what's important about sort of watching this is that this is what cowboy poetry is. It's not just the poem, which I think is actually a wonderful poem, but it's also the performance. And so let's see that?
Great.
The devices on my shaps were hearts, one torn in two, the other red and full. A romantic take, I thought, metaphor for rodeo and love's fits and starts. Back when I could spur the baddest buckers, I wrote on the rolls of my Salisbury 606 rough out cack an inscription, something from Ezra Pound, the translation from the Latin on a medieval sword. If your heart fails you, trust not in me. Oh, words to live by. To say that you are scared ain't nothing wrong in that, but to flee in the face of chance? Come on, cowboy. Roll 'em. Shake your face and let them have you.
Oh, that's terrific.
So
That's
that's
terrific. Oh, yeah.
and you see, it's a whole thing. I mean, it's a wonderful poem, and you can read the poem itself, but you know, in my book, but it's also just, it's the performance, it's the delivery, and that's, you know, that's all part of it, and that's what makes it such an incredible art, and the fact that it's a living art. And so Shad is he's actually from a ranching family, but he was I mean, that poem is about rodeo riding, and or I mean, it's using rodeo riding as a metaphor, but he was a rodeo rider. I mean, many of the really great cowboy poets are modern ones were were rodeo riders. A lot of them run farms. He and that has such a lot of things that the cowboy poetry has. A lot of the use of language, which I love. The cowboy, like he talks about his Salisbury 606. That's a saddle.
And what's a cack? Is a cack a saddle?
Is a, let's see, I wrote that down. It's a small double cinch. Oh, it's what bronc riders use. It's a small saddle, like a double cinch.
Okay.
With those
All
little
right.
saddles that they ride on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful. All right. So moving on a little bit moving on to Martin Oliphant, who is honestly one of the most endearing and engaging characters I've come across in a long time. How, besides your semi-disastrous barrel riding career, how did you come upon, how did you dream him up? How did he come to you, if that's what he did?
He it was a lot of what I write is I feel like it's almost like observation. It's more like I'm a reporter than I am a writer. And he was I was at a dude ranch. We go to a dude ranch every year. My family has for years. When I was young, we went to a dude ranch every year, and now once I had kids, we started again going to this fabulous. It's called Rainbow Trout Ranch. Everyone should go there. It's like the most wonderful vacation. They all pretend I know how to ride there. They like, you get to pretend to be a cowboy. It's like fantasy camp for, you know, like for cowboy wannabes. Just a wonderful family place. But I was there one year, several years ago. I'd broken my knee, and so I obviously couldn't. I was recovering from a broken knee, and I couldn't ride. And so there's this fabulous porch at Rainbow Trout Ranch, and you look down and I'm watching the rides go out, and they don't usually allow visitors, but somebody was visiting. I think they were thinking of coming later, and it was a man. He was, you know, about the age Martin ends up in his 50s. He was there with his sort of annoying parents. They clearly were on some sort of Western trip. They clearly were not going to end up going to a dude ranch, but they had come here and to look around. And so he's out on the porch too, and he is completely inappropriately dressed for a cowboy. He's got his Dockers on and his penny loafers, and he's sort of overweight in his short sleeve polyester shirt, and he's looking out at the riders going out in this beautiful valley. And I could tell, of course I'm making this up, he probably wasn't thinking this at all, but I thought for sure he was seeing himself there, and he was seeing himself as a cowboy. And I felt that sort of longing, and probably because it was entire transference, because I wanted to be out there, seeing myself as the cowgirl I will never be. And so I wrote this short story when I was there not writing, which ended up in Jersey Devil Press. People can go to my website if they want to read it. It was much darker humor than this, but it was the first sort of appearance of Martin, a guy who imagines himself riding, even though, you know, he is not and never will be the sort of great hero he wants to be.
Oh golly, no, that's it. He's so touching, and he's so long suffering. I mean,
Suffers for a long time. He absolutely is long suffering.
I mean,
which is how he comes to cowboy poetry, I think. I mean, he runs into it as a young man, a very young man, just at a point in his life when he is being asked to sacrifice an enormous amount to leave his college career, which was getting him out of his sort of awful family, who are very narcissistic and self-centered, and now dying. You know, his mother is dying of breast cancer. His father has had a series of strokes. You know, his brother is not at his sort of younger brother, who is not, if my brother is here, my brother. You know, like, my brother's name is Jack, and we now call him Jack, who is not Frank, the name of the brother in this story. And he's just at this point, he's at a dude ranch, and he runs into cowboy poetry, and it's sort of, for him, he's long suffering, and nobody is thankful for it, and he doesn't have any way to explain this to himself, that he's doing this, he's taking care of all these awful people, he's giving up his dreams of going to University of Chicago and sort of getting out of his small town of Pierre, and he can't find meaning for it, you know, and cowboy poetry comes along, and cowboy poetry can be very philosophical. It's very sort of, this is what, you know, this is what's good in life, and this is what being strong is. And
well, as Peel recited, "Come on, cowboy."
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, I'm scared. I love that line, and it comes up in the thing, or in the book several times. But it's, you know, to say you're scared ain't nothing wrong in that, but to flee in the face of chance, come on, cowboy, roll them, shake your face, and let them have you. I mean, I love that, and that Martin needs that at that point. He needs some meaning. So that's how he latches
and
on
a community of souls, it seems to me. He's chasing these souls, you know, who are noble, you know, these very noble souls, and you know, the people right around him are anything but. It's wonderful. Can you read that section of Martin in the bar?
Yeah, I can. I this is my favorite chapter in the book, and it's my usual, and I'm not going to read the whole chapter because it's very long. It goes on forever, but because I was really enjoying myself in it. But this is a section where Martin is a young man. He is just realized, he's just gone to the doctor with his mother, and the doctor said, look, she's on the way out and she needs full-time care. And with his father at the same time, who said, look, he's had a couple strokes and he's not capable of caring for her. He doesn't even remember who she is. And, you know, and Martin's saying, well, what am I supposed to do? And the doctor's like, I don't know. You know, like, good luck with this, you know?
Yeah.
So he's going to the bar, and he has sort of had a vision right before this of a cowboy poem that tells him to, you know, like, basically grasp on to what's real in life. And he's contemplating having to drop out of University of Chicago, which has been a very intellectual life, but he's trying to find a reason to be okay with that, I think, when he goes to the bar. And this also introduces a character, the editor of a paper, Bob Latner, who is Martin's sort of boss. And
I love Bob Latner. Yeah,
I love Bob Latner too, and he he's maybe my favorite character, and so that's another reason I love this section. But anyway. Okay, so he has left his mom, and he's decided to go to the bar because he just needs to be with men who work with their hands. That's what he's decided. The early 80s had been kind to neither farm nor factory, and Pierre, Michigan, sat on the border between the rust and fruit belts. In such a town, men drank at 4 o'clock, an hour after the 3 o'clock whistle. Not that there'd been a 3 o'clock whistle for years. At 3, they would rise up from the plastic-covered couches and Formica kitchen tables where they'd been having a coffee, reading that morning's leader telegram, resisting the urge to turn on the boob tube. They would rise to the unblown whistle like dogs to a silent call, pull on their tan car coats, leave notes for their wives to find when they returned from their shifts at the Holiday Inn. At the buck, they would scribble, back for supper. The men were already hunched over the scarred pine bar at 4:30 when Martin entered the smoky haze of the Silver Dollar Saloon. He extracted a stool from between two of them, both in pale yellow polo shirts and bent over half-full mugs of Boilermakers. Martin signaled the bartender, Hank, a pink bowling ball of a man with perfectly round eyes and a perpetually sized oval of a mouth. Hank puckered his lips and flared his cheeks. "What'll it be, son?" "A beer, I guess," said Martin, wishing he had the guts to order one with a depth charge of whiskey, a Boilermaker, like the regulars did. He wondered if that were a universal working man drink, one that a cowboy poet might slug down after a day walking the fence line and chasing reluctant dogies out of the aspen stands. Or was it just a Midwestern drink? A drink for guys who trafficked in steel, carburetor parts, assembly lines, and tires. "What's that, son?" said Hank. "I'm a little hard of hearing." Said Martin. "Over here!" A voice floated from the far bend of the bar. Martin looked in its direction and made out a gnarled branch of an arm swiping at the smoke clouds. "Martin Oliphant, join us." Martin did, leaving Hank muttering to the two regulars. "Mr. Latner," Martin said. "Hi." Bob Latner was the doggedly alcoholic and violently bitter editor of the Leader Telegram, which every morning brought the 8,000 or so residents of Pierre local news of national import through a global lens. Or so claimed the paper's motto, featured in the boxed ear to the left of the masthead. The slogan was mostly aspirational. Editorials on the bravery of Lake Michigan Polar Bear Club, or in-depth interviews with that year's acne-scarred cotillion Grand March leaders were typical of the paper's fare. Only occasionally did the editorial staff, which consisted of Latner and a revolving roster of recent college English grads, venture into issues such as AIDS or Ronald Reagan's second term. Martin had never spoken to Latner before, but knew who he was. Pierre was a small town, and Latner's presence was a given at any event of even the slightest significance. If not beloved by as many readers, he was tolerated as a necessary piece of public infrastructure. "Master Oliphant," said Latner, "what's your pleasure?" Martin wondered how long the newspaper man had been at the tavern. "A beer?" Martin said, then added, "A Stroh's," inspired by the aqua neon sign behind the bar. It bathed Flip, the donut shop proprietor, sitting next to Latner, in an undulating blue light. "A fine choice for the young prince. A Michigan beer for a Michigan man," said Latner, and yelled to Hank, "1 Stroh's with a Jim Beam chaser. On me." "Stroh's is piss water," said Flip. "Coors is what you want, but you can't get it here. My brother's going to bring me a case when he comes out. It's the water out west. It's pure. Don't catch on fire like Lake Erie do." "You are a victim of advertising and corporate manipulation, my friend," said Latner, a shill in the 3-card Monte game known as manufactured scarcity. Flip nodded, as if he'd known that all along. "How's your mother doing?" he asked, lifting his drink with both hands and taking a sip. "Piss water," he mumbled. "Okay," Martin said, horrified to hear his voice crack. "Good to hear," said Flip, burying his face in his stein and shutting his eyes. "Excellent news," said Latner. He patted Martin's hand, now flat in the bar, moved to do so again, seemed to think better of it, waved off a non-existent fly. The editor made a show of studying the Stroh's sign while sneaking glances at Martin, in sympathy perhaps, more likely concern that Martin might start blubbering. Martin understood. He shared that concern. Hank arrived with Martin's mug of Stroh's and the shot of Jim Beam. He kept his hand in his lap and stared at the 2 glasses, the mug filled with bubbling liquid that was, Flip was right, urine yellow, the shot glass almost overflowing. Before Martin could stop himself, he leaned over it and sniffed at it. "Like this," said Flip, snatching the shot glass from under Martin's nose and dropping it in the beer. Bubbles followed the pony as it floated to the bottom of the mug. A thin layer of foam slid over the side and puddled around the base. "Pretty," said Flip. Martin, as nonchalantly as he could manage, picked up his Boilermaker by the handle and sipped, he hoped not too delicately. The first taste was all beer. He took another sip, one he thought might even be described as a slug. This time, a flicker of whiskey licked at his sinuses, cigar in its undertones, a bit of gunpowder on the tongue. He downed 3/4 of the drink in one go, and hardly choked at all. Latner laughed and pounded him on the back. Another here, he called to Hank, and one more for me as well. You're okay, Martin Oliphant. Martin nodded, coughed once more. He was okay. That's why he was here right now and not at home warming up banquet Salisbury steak dinners for his mom and Frank. He was okay here, away from Hyde Park, among the men who worked with their hands, or pens, or fried dough. So, said Latner, headed back to school soon? Chicago, right? Fine school. Saw Bellows there, if I'm not mistaken. Bit over the top in their economics, but I don't suppose you're studying economics. Political science, said Martin, but not anymore. I quit. And Martin realized that, in fact, he would quit. Shame, said Latner. What's next for you? Martin finished his drink, caught one-handed the fresh mug Hank slid to him, drained half the glass, banged it down as he noticed an old man on the other end of the bar had done, shot the whiskey, and slugged back the rest of the beer. Another, he rasped. And what's next for me is poetry. Capital, said Latner. Next round's on you. Not too many poets here in Pierre, an open market. I'm a limerick man myself, said Flip. Martin wiped a tearing eye with the back of his hand, an eye tearing not with grief for his infirm mom or his newly aborted academic career, an eye tearing from the alcohol-infused stomach acid that had somehow lodged itself in his nasal cavity. Martin wasn't much of a drinker, and he hadn't had anything to eat since a bowl of Lucky Charms that morning. But he found he liked this drink, this Boilermaker. It could well be the perfect drink. Had it been made with Coors beer, followed by a shot of rot gut brewed in some Montana outlaw hidey hole, it would have even more fit his mood, his hunger at the moment. But this was close to what he needed, damn close. His third Boilermaker arrived, and this time he dropped the shot glass in the mug with a splash that raised a cheer of huzzah from Latner, and that's away from Flip. Martin wiped the foam from his upper lip and grinned. Two men closer to Martin's age than Latner or Flip pulled out stools at the long side of the bar around the corner from Martin. They both wore tight bell bottoms and matching denim vests over button-down polyblend monochromatic shirts, one mustard, one burgundy. Both had wet hair slicked back into tails that licked at their collars. One had a well-trimmed mustache, the other a scar that ran across his right cheek. Their aftershave reminded Martin of the smell of cabs he'd taken from the south side to downtown Chicago. Pine, cardamom, coffee, Lysol. Hank brought the two men beers without either ordering. Martin noticed they didn't get whiskey shots and wondered if Boilermakers were an old man's drink. Martin motioned Hank for another round and what he thought was an understated flick of his finger, but might have been a bit more, because Flip snorted and Latner chirped, "Ride 'em, Cowboy." "Cowboys," Martin said to no one in particular as his fourth Boilermaker arrived. "Cowboy poetry, to be precise." "Arthur Chapman," said Latner. "Excuse me," Martin said. "You said cowboy poetry, and then I said Arthur Chapman, who, if you know anything about cowboy poetry, is a cowboy poet. Perhaps the best known of the cowboy poets." Latner stood up, tapped the bar with one bony finger, and recited, "Out where the hand clasps a little stronger, out where the smile dwells a little longer, that's where the West begins." Hank deposited the next round in front of Latner, Flip, and Martin, and Latner bowed, arm stiff across his stomach, toward his latest beer. "These are on Martin," he said, "the cowboy poet." Martin didn't protest, just stared at Latner, who bowed again, this time immersing his thin nose and rectangular mustache into the beer, like a perpetual motion dipping bird sans red top hat. "I don't know that one. Arthur Chapman? You don't know Arthur Chapman? You don't know the classic Out Where the West Begins? What?" He hopped back on his stool, mustache dripping. "Do they teach in the Pierre public schools these days?" He cleared his throat, closed his eyes, poked Flip, who had put his head on his arms, and trumpeted, "Out where the sun is a little brighter, where the snows that fall are a trifle whiter, where the bonds of home are a wee bit tighter, that's where the West begins." "Is that it?" said Martin. "No," said Latner, "it goes on forever." "Do you need a job, by the way? Maybe the Leader Telegram should start a regular poetry column, cowboy poetry, or maybe for the local audience, angler poetry, or sailor's poetry, or small-town blowhard poetry." "Really? Of course," said Latner. Latner was probably kidding, but Martin was drunk, and Latner's nonsense was making more sense at the moment than anything he'd studied at U of C. "Bowling poetry," said Flip, and he put his head back down. But can I trust an inexperienced college dropout who doesn't even know Out Where the West Begins? How are you with limericks? Flip is always saying we ought to do a limerick column." With one finger, Latner fished for Flip's latest shot and pushed his own empty glass back to Flip's side. Without lifting his head, Flip said, "There once was a woman from Nantucket." This was another sign, of course, that Martin had found someone who knew of cowboy poetry, who knew more than Martin did about cowboy poetry, in Pierre. He was in the right place. He was being called. "What we ought to do," said Latner into the thinning hair on the back of Flip's head, "is a multi-part series on the life of Arthur Chapman, concluding on Sunday with an entire edition devoted to his poetry. Out Where the West Begins, of course, but also, you know, the rest of them. That's a great idea, said Martin, more loudly than he intended. Flip snorted. And Martin will write it, said Latner, and flew back Flip's shot. Martin will be my assistant, my muse, my journalistic journeyman, my literary lug nut. I will, said Martin, I will. What about that other guy, said Flip. Greg Lugnut? Greg Lang, said Latner, is a muscle-bound moron. I'm firing him tomorrow. He can sure write about basketball. This from one of the denim-clad men, the one with the mustache not unlike Latner's, though more carefully trimmed. And you can't, said Flip to Latner. Point taken, said Latner. Well, we'll no longer cover basketball, though that will mean the end of the paper, as most of our readers can only open the broadsheet for the PPHS scores. But no price too high for art. No price too high for cowboy poetry, right? He gestured at Martin without looking at him. Another round, said Hank. No, said Martin. Of course, said Latner and Flip at the same time. No drink too many for cowboy poetry, said Martin, as Hank went to fetch their order.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful.
And this one, that goes on probably too long, but I found it so amusing.
Oh, it's perfect jolly bar interaction. It's really
that bar still exists in my hometown. It's actually, it's one of the things that I kept the name of it. There is the Silver Dollar Saloon, and there was, my first boss was Flip the donut maker, who spent most of his nights making donuts and his days at the Silver Dollar Saloon, or the Buck, as they get called.
Oh, that's great. So your humor is so wonderful. And tell me, are you just funny, or do you see humor as built into fiction as serving certain literary purposes, or both? I mean, it's kind of
it's funny because I actually have been asked to teach a class on humor writing, and I absolutely refuse, because I never set out to write humor. I never sit down and write, I'm going to write a funny book, or I'm going to write a dark humor, and most of my stuff is pretty dark book. And I don't know how one would do that. I'm terrible. Like, I can't tell a joke to save my life. You know, like I can't, you know, like I'm horrible at it. I forget the punchline and my timing's all off. And the way I write, I feel like I just am observing things. I'm playing things out in my head and I'm just observing them. And this is like, I mean, this is the way the world looks to me a lot of the time. I mean, it's sort of not on purpose that I put in there, and people will say, I'll get critiques on chat and they'll be like, this is, and you know, the humor in this is great. I'm like, this is supposed to be sad, or this is supposed to be scary. And it's like, but it always comes out, you know, funny, I guess. And I think I just see the world funny. Maybe it's a defense mechanism, but whatever. I mean, this is just, I cannot write another way. I've written terribly sad things and they come out funny.
So how did speech writing work? I mean, yeah.
Well, the worst part about that is that you get asked to write jokes in speech writing, and I can't write a joke to save my life. I can't write a thing that is like intentionally funny.
Right.
It just doesn't work, you know. It's for me. So, you know, not well. You know, it's. I mean. It's sort of speech writing is my strength as a writer is probably line to line stuff. I'm good at I can put sentences together, and that serves you in speech writing really well, and sort of construct stuff that way. But you know, it's an entirely different thing than writing fiction or character. Sometimes in speech writing, you're doing a little bit of character making. You're making, you know, sort of writing a play basically. But it's just a whole different.
Yeah. Do you find that after 25 years of speech writing, you come out of there like a torpedo and just write funny stuff? I mean, you know, you've observed.
I guess, you know, I haven't ever written about politics, but I had a chance. Most of the people I work with were funny people. I mean, like most of the real, you know, I don't, this is just my way of complimenting myself, but I find that I feel like really smart people are often also really funny people a lot of times. it's sort of like an Oscar Wilde sort of thing. And so I feel like most of the people I worked with, even the man I spent the most time with in the Senate was Senator Herb Kohl, who's from senior senator from Wisconsin, and he was hilarious. I mean, he is really funny, and there was a high premium in our office communications on writing humorous things. And actually, the person who Latner is based on, except this man was not an alcoholic, but he had a lot of Latner's, I don't know, characteristics, humor. Was my first boss in there, the legislative director who I took over from, who is no longer alive. Unfortunately, his name was Bob Seltzer. He was fantastic and he was hilarious. And so he taught us all. I mean, we all you look at politics. I mean, a lot of what goes on in politics, it makes more sense if you tell it as a funny story.
Right. Well, Latner seems to be able to roll with anything, you know. I mean, he's ready to deep six the basketball coverage, which is the life of the paper, and instead do limericks and cowboy poetry. And you know, I think you need that.
Latner, I think, is in a constant. He's the kind of guy who looks for what is interesting and fun in the world, you know, while poor Martin is looking for meaning. You know?
Right.
Latner's not.
Yeah. Tell me, in a couple minutes, I'd really love to open this up to questions from the attendees, but I did want to ask you about researching this book, and what did you most enjoy, and how did it go? What surprised you?
I guess the thing I absolutely most enjoyed, once I discovered that I had not invented cowboy poetry, I went to the National Cowboy Poetry Gathering, for which is sort of the goal of Martin in this book. It's named something slightly different because I needed to make a couple changes to make it work for the story, but it's essentially the same event, which is in Elko, Nevada. It's a week-long, but mostly sort of a 4-day intensive set of performances that where cowboy poets come and recite, and to like packed shows. I mean, like 4,000 person auditoriums where seriously you have to sign up and be a member to get early tickets to even like get a chance to get these tickets. They're like, you know, it's like Elton John's final tour stuff to hear some of the big ones. And the little shows are all packed too. I mean, like, and they have them, they go all day long. You can listen to cowboy poets all day long. And it was fantastic. A lot of, there's a scenes toward the end of the book where Martin is at the cowboy poetry, the National Cowboy Poetry, and this one is called the Elko Cowboy Poetry Confluence, but it's that was based exactly on my time there and going to some of these shows and seeing some fantastic these performers who were just, it was so much fun. And I felt like I was in something, you know, that was like, it was like art that was happening right there, as being created, you know, like in that space. And it was this group of people who really didn't care if anybody else, you know, like whether the Easterners there liked it or didn't like it, but they were performing for each other, and they were performing for the love of performing. And it was so much fun to be there. And anybody can go. They're doing it this year at the end of January in Elko, you know, like great place to be, high desert Sierra. And I recommend it. I mean, it's fantastic.
Now, does NPR really cover it? There was okay.
I made up there's the cowboy poet is there's a sort of character in this book, the cowboy poet, who runs a long running NPR show in my book called the Cowboy Poetry Hour. And that does not exist in real life, but it was sort of based on Garrison Keillor and Prairie Home Companion. Sort of, it's because cowboy poetry is very similar, you know. It's
right.
And the cowboy poet in my book, Ves Guthrie, has some of the same issues that Garrison Keillor had. So it's very, yeah. So there's, but NPR does in fact cover it.
Okay.
Not like, gavel to gavel, but it definitely, it always sends a reporter. There's a wonderful writer named Carson Vaughn who has done who did a piece for the New Yorker on cowboy poetry in the Gathering. He's done pieces for Paris Review. And so every once in a while, the Gathering gets these like little Eastern literati mentions, and people are all sort of fascinated with it for a little bit. And Carson Vaughn's a fantastic writer, so he's done wonderful things for it. But again, they don't really care if the continues to carry them or not.
Okay, well, we are having a couple questions here. Elizabeth McAllister would like to know, what do you think is the value in writing humor?
I mean, for me, the value is I get to be a writer, because I can't, as I said before, I can't write anything else. I don't really, I mean, I don't know if there is a particular value. I mean, it's a different way to swallow. I'm suddenly thinking Mary Poppins, sort of spoonful of sugar, but it's a different way to swallow various sort of stories or life stories, some which are harder. I mean, there's a lot of humor in this, and yet, 3/4 of the book is about somebody's mother dying sort of really tragically of breast cancer. That's, I think it's just another way to sort of get into these stories that are sort of universal stories that we tell all the time in literature, and we tell the same story. I mean, this is a hero's journey sort of story, a finding meaning sort of story. And you need to find different ways to tell the same story. And some people, some people like it. Some people don't like it. And I am totally okay with that. Like there are people who just are like, I do not find dead horses funny. And and one of my favorite authors, C.J. Hauser, who helped a lot with this book and helped name it, she said to me, she said, it's a great name for this book. And she said, there is going to be a group of readers who will never pick up a book named For Dead Horses. And she said, but the people who do, the people who be like, oh yeah, I'll find that funny. Those are your readers. So it's great. It's like it's like a sieve.
Yeah, a little filter there. Tom Bedell has another great question. Have you tried writing your own cowboy poems, or would that be presumptuous?
It would be presumptuous. That was also when I first workshopped this parts of this book in my MFA program. That was the question they asked. I said, "Oh, you do cowboy poetry?" And I'm like, the more I learn about it, it is it's an art that, and I don't have any of the skills, and I don't have the background. I'm not from a ranching community. I'm an admirer of it, but it's not. It is got a long tradition. It's got rules that can be broken, like a lot of things, like literature and everything else, but you have to know them. It has a history that is important to know, and it has a sort of a basic message about ranch life and ranch culture that I do not have access to. So yeah, it would be and I'm not a particularly good poet in any case, but I think I would be even a worse. I would attempt some other kind of poetry before I would attempt cowboy poetry. I love it, but it's not something I can do.
So just we have a few minutes left, and I'd love to know what writers you return to again and again. Any new discoveries that
I'll tell you, my new favorite writer is Nathaniel Hill, who wrote The Knicks a couple of years ago, and he's going to have a new novel coming out. I happen to know because I wrote an obsessively fawning fan letter to him.
No, I read The Knicks. I liked it. Yeah, great.
I I love that book. It's very character driven. I think it's just wonderful, sort of rich storytelling, and it's funny. It's actually, it is. I find I love his humor. So he's my new favorite. And people I return to. I love Kevin Wilson. And his latest Nothing to See Here about the
Oh yeah, the
you know,
spontaneously combusting family.
the man who has to take care of children who spontaneously combust. I mean, that's
Right,
that's
right.
a great story. And then I love Teddy Wayne. And he's my favorite book. Now the Nixon maybe is in line with it, but my favorite book for a long time has been a book, one of his first books, actually it was the second book, I believe. It was called The Long Love Song of Johnny Valentine, which is basically, it's a wonderful book. There's people who have CJ Hauser is I think I mentioned before, she's been a mentor to me despite the fact she could be my daughter. She wrote Family of Origin. She's got some essays that are going to come out soon that are great. Ashley Warlick, I don't know, is a historic fiction writer. She's somebody who is a friend and collaborate. I mean, she's actually runs a sort of novelist group that I'm working on my second novel with. She wrote a book called The Arrangement, which I love. That's her latest. Ryan Stradal writes. I think of my fiction as, despite all the Western stuff, as Midwestern fiction. And Ryan writes, he writes the best, I think, Midwestern fiction out there. He wrote Kitchens of the Great Midwest, and his latest is Lager Queen of
Oh, okay.
And I think he's finishing up one too. I love, I love David Mitchell. He's
Yeah.
Utopia Avenue is his, like, he's another big, I tend to like these books, and I wish I could write them, that are big and full of just really unique characters, that all telling their story in their own way.
Right. Okay, one more question. I guess somebody took their question away, but there's another one. If from Austin Eau Claire, if there was a secret fifth horse, what would be the manner of its death?
Oh, that's mean, Austin. Hello, Austin. Austin's my son.
That sounds like a son question, right?
Well, I mean, you should, if you do a careful reading, dear, you'll notice that there might be a fifth horse. So, and then you can see exactly how that horse might have died. So there you go. I didn't have an actual another way of dying planned out.
So for someone did ask, where might one find cowboy poetry?
I think I left.
So there are some links on your website, is it? And you also have a page in the chat. We have a page of links and bibliography on cowboy poetry that
they'll be posted on the Literary Festival website on the Literary Cocktail Hour page. So you can go there to see that, and you can also go there to see our fall lineup if you haven't been there yet. It's all out there.
There's a link. One of those links is the Western Folklife Center, and you can just Google them. They run the National Poetry Gathering, and they have a lot of resources on their page, and on cowboy poets, and their social media is full of recordings of cowboy poets and other stuff that they're up to. But that's a good starting place for if you're looking to sort of learn more about cowboy poetry. It's fantastic. It's really fun to read. I have piles of it.
Well, thank you so much, guys.
So much. It was great. I'm thrilled. The book is available through, Sandy, do you want to cover this through bookshop.org?
Bookshop.org.
Or your local book.
Or your local bookstore.
Yep, or your local book. Or, well, we won't go into the other option.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. support the indies. Such a wonderful book. KT, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank
What a
you
blast.
all. It was really fun meeting you all, and fun sort of virtually coming to Vermont.
Yeah. We hope you can come in real time sometime soon.
I'd love to. I've actually one of the few states I've never been to.
Oh,
I know,
good.
right? So,
Yeah.
anyway,
All right.
thank you all.
Yes. Yeah, and thank you, everyone. We are looking forward to the Fall Festival. I don't know yet what's going to be happening in August, but I will let you know. And I think that's pretty much donate early and often. It's the link is on our website, and maybe it's going to, oh, there it is. It just popped up. Thank you. Everybody have a fabulous weekend, and it looks like the rain is going to go away, at least for us locals, and maybe we'll send it to Virginia, because it sounds like you guys maybe need some rain, huh?
Yeah, we could here anyway.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Thank you so much, and thank you.